Ladies and gentlemen, drivers, gig workers, and everyone in between, welcome to This Week in Rideshare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Hoffa. It is Friday, November 14th, and this week, male drivers sue, Waymo hits the highway, and Uber is sending rides. Legal Rideshare breaks it down. And from Legal Rideshare, I'm joined by the co-founder and lead attorney, Bryant Greening. Bryant, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jared. Great to be here.
It's certainly great to be here. A little rusty today for no reason at all. You know, I never mess up the intro, but hey, there's a first for everything, right?
Hey, you know what? Perfection is an impossible standard, and we would never hold you to it. So,
I'm glad. I appreciate that. What is that? Impossible's the enemy of great? I forget. There's like some saying about that, though. So I don't feel so bad.
something along that. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. And let me tell you, we're good enough here.
We are good enough. We are. And some interesting stories this week, and some have just developed, and some I'm quite surprised about. And the first one is truly a surprise to me. Male drivers are suing Uber and Lyft over discrimination. And this is from the time they reported, quote, male drivers for Uber and Lyft are suing the companies over a feature that lets users hail only women drivers. The class action suit alleges that the functions, which followed thousands of sexual harassment and assault lawsuits against Uber and Lyft, have limited the economic opportunities for men and discriminated against them because of their gender. Lawyers acting for the plaintiffs argue that male drivers are discriminated against and receive fewer and different rides than they otherwise would absent the policy. So, Bryant, this is really interesting stuff. I didn't see this coming a mile away. We had talked about the women-only rides on both Uber and Lyft, but male drivers are saying, hey, it's not fair. I'm losing business.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument. I mean, from a practical standpoint, I think that the ability for women to choose women drivers is important. And I think it's a safety feature that can go a long way to keeping people safe, making people feel more comfortable, and ultimately making rideshare a better experience for every consumer. I mean, if women want to ride with women, I just don't really see, practically speaking, why that should be a problem. Legally speaking, however, the men do make a point that they're getting fewer rides, that they're losing opportunities to economic, opportunities that they would have otherwise had. It'll be interesting to see how the courts rule. I think that the law, from a general perspective, prohibits discrimination based on gender. I would say that this policy probably on its face does discriminate based on gender. However, there's always some nuance, and courts look at things with various levels of scrutiny based on the aims of various policies and procedures. So if Uber can come in and say that there is a real safety feature that they're trying to put forward on their app, they're trying to protect the community, there may be ways for the court to allow certain quote unquote discrimination for limited purposes for the benefit of all. When we talk about various laws that are put into place, it depends a lot of times on the type of business. If it's a government actor, there's all sorts of nuance. So we'll see how the courts look at this one. But ultimately, I do think that Uber is going to have a really good basis for this policy if it's going to survive, since I think inherently it does, unfortunately, result in discrimination against one group over another.
Yeah, and it even says in the article, and I'm sure you know this, California, where this suit is happening, has some of the strongest anti-discrimination laws. And again, they're going after both Uber and Lyft for violating the Unruh Act, which is a California civil rights law that expressly prohibits sex discrimination by business enterprises. So like you said, Bryant, legally it seems like they actually do have a standing. They are looking at $4,000 in damages per male driver. So it doesn't seem like they're saying that they want to kill the app, but they definitely want to get compensated for what they're saying they lost. Do you think that even if they win, the app would stay? I mean, what do you think that they ultimately want?
I don't. I think if the court were to find in the plaintiff's favor here, and award $4,000 in damages to every male Uber driver, I cannot imagine that Uber would continue the program, at least in California and any state where there was a similar law, because it would just get too expensive. Like they'd be continually paying fines for this sort of discrimination, for lack of any other word to use. Um, Ultimately, I do think that the courts are going to have to weigh, is this discrimination that we're comfortable with? It's weird to talk about it that way, but sometimes there are reasons why certain groups need to get preference over others. And what the courts need to figure out is, one, is this just legal or illegal on its face? And two, if there is any wiggle room, like maybe Uber's benign desire to have this difference between male drivers and women drivers, like maybe it's an honorable thing that they're trying to do in this particular instance, but could this provide cover to somebody who wanted to discriminate in a less honorable way, somebody who wanted to use this ruling to target different genders or different races or different religions? And could this be bad precedent, even if Uber's not really trying to do anything discriminatory in the way that we think about it? Could this set up other bad actors in the future? And certainly courts would want to strike down discrimination for, even if it was good, if it was going to set up the opportunity for others to use it for bad later.
Got it. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts here. So this is not, on the surface, if you don't know much about this, it seems like, well, that's ridiculous. But as you're explaining, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of chain reactions if this is, if they approve or deny this. So it's all very interesting. Again, this just came out. I was shocked to see it. I'm sure we'll see some article on what they rule on. Haven't seen it yet. So that'll tell us really what happens and how it moves forward. Another article this week that, again, I guess I was shocked by. I didn't really put this together. I don't know if you had, but Waymo wasn't on the highways, and now it is. And this is from Bloomberg, and they reported, quote, Waymo will be the first robotaxi provider in the U.S. to offer driverless rides on highways, a milestone that positions it to better compete with the other ride-hailing companies and, of course, traditional taxi services. So beginning Wednesday, it's already happened, the units will begin offering some riders routes that include freeways in San Fran, Phoenix, and LA. Freeway service will be available 24 hours a day. Users who have opted to the Waymo's new services and features will be the first to be able to try this kind of trip. Now, Bryant, this is also really interesting too, because I didn't add this in this week's Rideshare, but I'm going to mention it. A couple weeks back or a couple months back, Elon Musk was very famous for saying that Waymo's vehicles could never do highway trips because of the tech behind them. And now we're seeing they're doing highway trips.
Yeah, this is a big step for Waymo. This obviously opens up a lot more of the cities that they're operating in. If before they were limited to city streets and kind of urban areas, they can't get from, the suburbs to the city, for instance, in a lot of ways. It opens up the market in a totally different way. I will say that, I'm not a tech guy, but I would imagine that highway driving is actually easier than city driving. There are far fewer obstacles that are typically going to present themselves. There's not usually pedestrians jetting across the road. You're kind of staying in your lane and you're, watching traffic around you. And if traffic slows down, you slow down. So I would imagine that this is a good next step for them in terms of expanding their market share when, the technology itself isn't going to be tested in any more meaningful way. We should say highway driving does offer opportunity for far graver risk of injury because the speeds are so much bigger than typically on a city street. But I would imagine that just riding on the freeway is actually a smoother ride and less technologically challenging than driving in the grid of the city when there could be obstacles that really you could never predict without the experience of doing it for 20, 30 years like us human drivers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I thought it would be easier. I honestly kind of thought they were already doing it. The other thing that's interesting too is like what a really a one-two punch here, because not too long ago we were talking on the show about how Waymo are slightly more expensive and slower, and both things did not deter people from using them. Well, now if they're going to start really deploying highways, they're going to get rid of one of those issues that they currently have, which is speed. Because right now, like you said, they're doing side roads and it's a different thing. Well, now the highways are getting involved. So now the only obstacle truly will be, hey, they're slightly more expensive, but people have already shown they're okay with that. So there's a lot at stake here for their Waymo's competitors. I'd love to see what Tesla comes back with now that, especially Elon, who said that this is impossible. And of course, he said that his cybercabs are going into production in April. But again, this is just another huge, planting a flag in the ground for Waymo, who's is sort of trudging ahead pretty quickly.
Right. Everybody wants to win, and right now Waymo is winning, it seems like.
Yes, 100%. And we're going to switch gears here for a final story, non-robotaxi related here. Waymo is adding some new features, and this is from The Verge, and they reported the new, quote, send a ride feature allows you to pay for someone else's Uber ride directly from the app. You set the number of rides and spending limit, and then send a link to whoever you want to gift the rides to. Additionally, the JFK International Airport are now available for Uber Share, which discounts your Uber fare when you share your ride with someone heading in the same direction. The update arises as airports are still experiencing disruptions, obviously, as we know about with the government shutdown. Even now that the shutdown has ended, it's still having some issues. They also included Uber Ski, which apparently is an easier way to reserve Uber XL or Uber XXL near the 40 top ski locations in North America and Europe. So this is sort of a news story / press push by Uber. I thought it was interesting, though, that the send a ride feature, I'd love to get your input on this. I think it's a good idea to have the send a ride. I literally had to use this the other day, and it's a smart thing. I do, again, wonder, though, about identification and who's responsible if something goes wrong. I mean, this is where it seems like what happens at that point. It seems muddy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start with this. It's a cool feature. I can see it with families where, a parent wants to send a ride for their teenager or their adult child or a spouse, or, you could think of various ways that this would be used. And most of the time, I think it would be beneficial to the people who are using it. That said, as we want to talk about accountability and responsibility, anytime that there is a ride that's being sent for someone else and the driver doesn't know who's getting into their vehicle, it does create a complicated situation where the driver needs to, understand that this person who's getting into their car isn't necessarily vetted in the same way that the ride requester is. So if I use my account to send a ride for Jared, and Jared gets into the car, well, the only information that the driver has is about me, is about my history, my rating, my reviews. They don't know who Jared is. And I think that just puts drivers in a really tough scenario because they can't then make educated decisions about, is the rider the type of rider that I want to pick up based on the limited information that they have at their disposal. Some drivers don't want riders that have 4 stars or lower. They only want 5-star riders. And I get that. When you are sending a ride for somebody else, you're taking that power away from the driver to vet with whatever information they have. And that certainly could be problematic.
Yeah, exactly. And even with the second point here, too, and actually, first, just to back up, yeah, just like you said, the other thing, too, is, on top of not knowing who they are, there's just confusion. And then people can start saying they are that person. The driver could say, that's not the person that's on this list. I mean, I go through this now, even with the Uber app in general. Sometimes the fact that I work for LegalRideshare pops up, and I say, hey, it's a ride for Jared, but they're like, it doesn't say Jared. So there's all these things already happening, and then you add this to this situation. And so, right, now you're having whose name is it? And I don't know who this person is. And it could start to be causing issues. We haven't, it's so new, we haven't seen any issues yet or any stories on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. And then also with the Uber Share, which is kind of the second feature they're re-rolling out, the ability to basically get almost the equivalent of a bus shared ride from one direction out of the airport. Again, it seems like a pretty good idea, but we have seen in the past Uber drivers typically don't like that because A, they don't make tips, B, there's problems, and C, there's usually fights between passengers. So it becomes this whole thing. So again, I guess we'll just see how that goes too.
Yeah, the shared rides thing always comes back, and it seems like they phase it in, phase it out, and drivers hate it, and passengers like it because it does offer cheaper rides. But it seems like they can never make up their mind as to whether they're going to keep this feature. I've used the shared ride feature. I was curious how it worked, and I find it a little uncomfortable to be like when it's just you and the stranger driver in the car, like that's an accepted kind of relationship where I'm the customer, you're the driver, and like we understand kind of who everybody is in the scenario. But then when you bring in like some other third person, I feel like the dynamic in the car changes, and it's just this more awkward environment, and everybody's got like this heightened sense of, am I safe, am I not safe?
Right.
So I don't really love the shared feature for that reason. I get the benefit of it from a cost perspective, and also like from an environmental standpoint. Like I like the idea that we're carpooling, and that if we're all going in the same direction, why not ride together? But this shared ride, we've been doing this for a decade now, and we've just seen many instances of shared rides going poorly for drivers, for passengers, and it seems like the benefits that come from the shared ride might not be worth it.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I truly cannot agree more. I don't know if you remember this, but when the Uber first released shared ride, there was sort of an issue because it was the default setting on Uber. This is years ago, and I didn't know it defaulted to the shared ride, and so I took a ride, and then now I'm in a car with a bunch of strangers, and it felt like the most uncomfortable road trip ever because it's like you don't know these people. They're sitting next to you, and you're right, the dynamic changes. And yeah, Uber, I don't think knows what to do with shared rides. I think they see it as, hey, it's a way that we get more users and they're happier, like you said. But it just always ends up being a problem at some point. And then they like yank it off, and it's like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. So right. I guess we'll see what they do this time.
Yeah, I think what'll happen is they'll do it for a couple months or a year, and then it'll be yanked off, and then a year from now they'll put it back on. Like I think
that seems to be their thing, and then we'll do a story about it a year from now, how it's back again.
Right.
Hilarious. But that is our stories for this week. And Brian, of course, I'll give you the final say before we head to the weekend.
Yeah, just remind everybody that Legal Rideshare is always available for free consultations. Our lawyers can help you with insurance claims, accident claims, injury claims, any sort of event that happens on a rideshare ride. We can help you collect medical bills, costs of lost wages, pain and suffering, any damage that you sustain. Please give us a call. You can find all of our contact information on our website, legalrideshare.com. And time is of the essence. We do not want the claim to get stale. We want to get started for you right away. So please do not hesitate to reach out.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And as I like to say, that is the end of This Week in Rideshare. See you next week.